breaking news into us from Brussels. Our Fred Pleitgen has the latest. Fred, what can you tell us?
Oh, sorry, you just do have to keep us up to speed if you're bringing yet more.
The federal prosecutor's office here in Belgium, and what they're telling us now is that they can now confirm that Mohamed Abrini, of course the man arrested, or the main suspect arrested here on Friday, is indeed the third man in that CCTV video that was taken at the airport right before the Brussels attacks. I want to read you the statement that we just got literally moments ago from the federal prosecutor's office, which says, and I quote, "The federal prosecutor's office can now confirm that Mohamed Abrini indeed is the third man present at the Brussels National Airport attacks. After being confronted with the results of the different expert examinations, he confessed his presence at the crime scene. He explained having thrown away his vest in a garbage bin and having sold his hat afterwards." You'll remember that there were 3 people in that shot shortly before those attacks took place at the airport. 2 of them were later identified as being suicide bombers. 1 man was then seen going away wearing a coat and a hat. The police then later retraced his steps using video cameras that were around here in the city. They saw that at some point he had dumped his coat, which apparently now he confessed to, and that in the end he also got rid of his hat. It was very important, we spoke to the federal prosecutor as well, it was very important for him to point out that at first they had these facial recognition tools that they used, and that then Mohamed Abrini himself did confess to being the third person who was seen there on that video camera footage. So indeed, a very big new turn here in this investigation, one that some people would have been expecting. Many people were already speculating on whether or not he might be that third person in that picture that was put out, and now indeed we do have the confirmation that he was indeed present at those airport attacks. Linda.
This is absolutely a huge development. Now, he was charged with terror-related offences before he made this confession. Yeah. Can you just remind us of those charges, and is it possible that new charges will be added?
Well, I mean, the terrorism charges certainly were ones that were brought towards him before he actually did make this confession, or at least before we got word from the federal prosecutor's office that he had indeed made this confession. It's unclear whether or not they levied the charges, and he might have already confessed before that. It could indeed happen that there could now be other charges levied as well, simply because of the scale of the acts that were perpetrated, the scale of the amount of people who were killed at those airport bombings. But that's something that certainly the Belgian judiciary will decide now going forward. Of course, because of the fact that he has been charged, he is going to remain in custody. The investigation will, of course, be going forward. And the authorities say that the investigation is still ongoing. And of course, they're still trying to find out whether or not there still might be other people at large who may have helped Mohamed Abrini, who may have helped also Osama Krayem as well, the man who's also been identified for having participated, or at least having been on hand at the metro bombing that also took place on the same day. So there is still a lot of police work to be done, a lot of investigative work to be done, and a lot of work by the federal prosecutors. And at some point, they'll come up with a charge sheet that certainly could possibly be expanded now that this confession has been made, Linda.
No doubt this is a big win for authorities. Just to remind our viewers of the connection that police believe Abrini had, and not just to the Brussels attacks, but also the Paris attacks, and his link with Abdeslam.
Well, it's very, very important, and it certainly shows how the 2 terror attacks that happened here in these 2 major European cities in many ways were indeed linked. If you look at Mohamed Abrini, who is implicated now very much, of course, in the Brussels attacks, he was also being sought because of the Paris attacks as well. And that's because 2 days before the Paris attacks took place on the 11th of November, he was seen at a gas station together with Saleh Abdeslam, driving one of the cars that was later found in Paris and which was then found to have been used during the Paris attack. So it is believed that he at least brought some of the Paris attackers to the French capitals to then perpetrate the attacks there. Now, he was then being sought as one of the most wanted people in Europe and possibly even in the entire world. And then now he is also implicated in the attacks there that happened in Brussels as well, a part of a wider cell that, of course, also included many other people who had links to both of these attacks. And so it does appear as though the attacks that were perpetrated in these 2 cities very much linked, very much going back or having really started here in the Belgian capital, as many of these people have known each other for a very long time. Some of them were childhood friends. Some of them, quite frankly, went to Syria together at some point in time to fight with ISIS there. So it's certainly big links that the police now by and by are starting to put together. And the information that we've gotten now over the past couple of minutes and over this past day certainly have corroborated a lot of theories that have been out there for the past couple of months since the Paris attacks and the past couple of weeks since the Brussels attacks as well. And they really paint a more and more clear picture of this very wide cell that seems to have been behind a lot of the terror that's been going on in Europe over the past couple of months, Lynda.
Now, when Abdeslam was arrested, we know that just several days later, about 4 days later, the Brussels attacks happened. Given the significance of these current arrests and charges, authorities must be concerned about any other terror plot that may be in the works, that may be being accelerated right now.
Certainly, and that's probably one of the reasons why you're seeing such an accelerated tempo of police operations here in the Brussels area over the past 24 hours. Remember that Mohamed Abrini was taken into custody by the police at around 4 p.m. On Friday, and in the hours since then, or in the days since then, you have seen various larger police raids that went on. One of the ones that we were at today at the Etterbeek district here in Brussels, which was a massive police operation involving some at least 50 officers, also some specialists on hand as well there. And it showed that the police then later said that they believed that this apartment that they were searching may have been a safe house that was used by the people who are now accused, Lynda.
Now, we've heard so much about Molenbeek and that particular suburb of Brussels being a hotbed for radicalization. What do we know about Etterbeek?
Well, Etterbeek is really a district that's quite mixed. It's interesting when you look at a lot of these Brussels districts, even Molenbeek and like Schaerbeek as well. They are districts who, in some areas, you know, they'll have working class areas, areas with some social problems, but they'll also have some wealthy areas as well. We were at that area in Etterbeek, and you go around there, and it really is a very mixed community. There's people of all sorts of walks of life here. It certainly doesn't strike you as one that would appear to have larger social problems, and also that housing complex there in Etterbeek really is one with people of many nationalities and a lot of people who, quite frankly, were very surprised to all of a sudden find the police knocking at their doors and in some cases knocking down their doors. And that police operation also ended after a few hours, and the cops there said that they hadn't actually found any sort of explosives, they hadn't found any sort of weapons in that area. However, it does go to show that in some cases you do have the people who are behind these attacks, you do have people plotting things, trying to move into residential areas, using apartments there to try and hide. It happened apparently in Etterbeek, the police believes. It happened in the Forest district, where of course the police went and knocked on a house there, on a house door there, and that was really a very residential neighborhood there as well. And they went in, they thought an apartment there was empty, and all of a sudden people opened fire on them. One of the perpetrators, they believe, behind the Paris attacks was hiding in that apartment. So the police have conducted many raids in areas where they might not have expected people to be hiding out, but you can see the police is really stepping up the tempo of its operations here in Brussels, trying to come to terms also with the wider group of people that might have been behind all of this, not just in perpetrating attacks in Brussels and Paris, but also in helping those who are perpetrating those attacks logistically and helping them to hide, Lynda.
Yeah, you make an interesting point about the longer this goes on, the more suspects and names we learn of. It seems to me that authorities really don't know how big this network is across Europe.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that the French president, François Hollande, said quite recently, and this was still before the Brussels attacks, but a few months after the Paris attacks, is that he said that as the investigation was going on, that the French authorities were quite surprised to see how many people were actually involved. Now, it was never clear what they believe, how many people might still be at large. There was some speculation in the media, but also among authorities, that there was at least a dozen people who might still be on the run, connected possibly to the Paris attacks, but definitely to the Brussels attacks. That number really has never been substantiated, but it does go to show that apparently there must have been, and there could very well still be, a wider network of people who do appear to help facilitate all of this. If you look at, for instance, the most recent arrests that took place here on Friday, you have the arrest of Mohamed Abrini. He was arrested together with 2 other people. Both of them were let go. You have the arrest of Osama Crichton. He was arrested with another person. You have the arrest of Salah Abdeslam. He was inside a residential house with 3 other people. So in every case, in some way, shape, or form, these people had folks in their houses who were very much wanted in Europe, and yet it was still possible for them to, at least for a while, find safe haven in those places. And of course, that is something that does worry the authorities here, because clearly they don't really have an inroad into many of these communities where some of this is going on, Lynda.